this historic blue wave that's taken Washington and Trump by storm and has many bracing for Democratic investigative powers, which come, of course, with this House takeover that everyone's been talking about. Now, we are heading into holiday season, and the new year will be bringing more than holiday cheer to Washington. Take a look at the change hitting this Congress. The average age of members of Congress drops a full decade because of this young freshman class. The 2019 Congress also shattering diversity records. You've certainly heard about that. More than 100 women elected to the House for the first time in history. Now, we didn't know what the results would be, but before the election, we devoted a special panel of 8 first-time women candidates to come on the beat. I should note that 3 of the eventual winners on the panel discussed the importance of representation.
There's never been a Native American woman in Congress. If you've always been represented in this country, you don't know what it's like to not ever see yourself in any body of government.
I'm a working single mom of 3 young children, and it's very much part of who I am. I think our democracy is only as rich and as vibrant as the voices that we hear in it.
I was told you'll never be seen as viable because you can't raise the money that it takes. I'm proud to say that in both the primary and the general, I've raised more than any of the candidates on either side.
That was candidate Haynes. She's now Congresswoman-elect Haynes, perfectly viable. Now, what are the Democrats going to do with the power? They say their first priority is actually strengthening the way democracy works in this country, removing obstacles to voting, dealing with ethics, and reducing the influence of political money. Then comes those reports of 85 potentially different investigations and oversight operations to deal with this very unusual Trump administration. Now, leaders in Congress aren't sharing all the details, but they're making it clear. We can report for you tonight. These investigations they see as a crucial step going forward.
You know, let's face it, the investigations are sexy. They're interesting, but we are going to need to ruthlessly prioritize on the Intel Committee which investigative threads we go down.
This is the president trying to abuse his power to prevent, not investigations, but to prevent Congress from doing its constitutional duty of being a check and a balance on the administration.
I'm not going to be handing out subpoenas like somebody's handing out candy on Halloween. I take subpoenas very seriously.
With me now is former Watergate Special Prosecutor Nick Akerman, Christina Greer, political science professor at Fordham University, and Liz Plank, host of Vox Media's Consider It. Thanks to all of you for being here. Christina, what do you think it means to have such a different Congress, not only a bluer Congress?
I think it's a really great opportunity for Democrats. Once they figure out who their leader will be, then they can set forth a real either a progressive agenda or a more centrist agenda. I think a lot of people are still thinking about 1998 and making sure that impeachment isn't the only thing that is sort of on the table. Obviously, you know, there are certain Democrats who really want that, but the new composition really wants to put forward an agenda of what will Democrats do to either combat this particular president or work with Senate Republicans to actually give us either legislation or some sort of substantive policy beyond just fighting Trump and, you know, thinking about just taxes and just impeachment and just Jared Kushner and Robert Mueller.
There's an old saying, Liz, you know, this isn't your daddy's movie or this isn't your daddy's mug or whatever. When people used to say, well, this isn't your daddy's Congress, well, for many years, this was your daddy's Congress, overwhelmingly white, male, and quite frankly, elderly. And it's not that any of those things are automatically good, bad, or in between, but in a democracy, they just certainly don't look like the rest of the nation. What do you think, especially, I'm gonna say it, as a young person, about the fact that just this new wave of freshmen has lowered the age of Congress by a decade?
Yes, I love old white men, but that is not the only perspective, right, that is important in Congress and in government and in our society. And, you know, we talk about the blue wave, but it's also a brown wave. We had so many, particularly women of color, really have these incredible wins and get this amazing support amongst the party and outside the party and get new people to the party. 37% of the new House members are women of color. That is actually their proportion in our society. That is remarkable. That should be totally normal. But this is the new normal. And so that's a sign to the Democratic Party to invest in those women, to invest in women of color who have always been the backbone of the party and now have been able to really grow the party.
Well, and one of the most fascinating statistics that didn't break through on election night, to your point about thinking through a historical lens, the last time that voter turnout in a midterm was this high, women didn't have the right to vote.
Wow. That's incredible. And yeah, I was with the Parkland kids actually a few days before the election, and they were seeing the voter turnout there, just 500% increase in Texas, particularly where we were. This is incredible, and this is only going to get bigger and better in 2020.
Nick Akerman, let's get a little constitutional.
Right.
The Congress is not just a policy-making body. It is not just a body that writes laws. The founders gave it, and the courts have understood it to have, a robust subpoena power because it has an investigative function. Now, Newt Gingrich was out right away with what some people would call concern trolling, fake advice to Democrats, even though he's not known for rooting for Democrats. But he says, be careful how tough you are. Take a look.
If all you do is end up in investigations, which unfortunately we did in '98, it actually hurts you because the country wants to see things work. The country doesn't want to have the House Democrats spend all day, every day in investigations and in open warfare against the president.
Well, let me say this first. I mean, the big investigation is the Mueller investigation. And I think Congress has to learn the same lesson and look at what's happened in the past with Watergate, for example. They should just leave that investigation alone, give what they've got to the Mueller people, let them have all the transcripts, all the interviews, but let Mueller do that investigation. If they start talking to people, start investigating, they're just going to step on the process.
So that might surprise some people. I mean, I talk to people who watch the show, and they're very eager to see this investigative function. You, Nick Akerman, Watergate specialist, are saying don't rush and try to bring Don Jr. before the committee or other people, Roger Stone, who might actually right now need to just be focused as potential Mueller targets.
Right. Now, on the other hand, there are some very legitimate areas that Congress ought to be looking at. One is this whole issue of the emoluments clause. The president is not supposed to be getting benefits from foreign governments like he's doing with his hotels unless it's approved by Congress. This is a completely legitimate function of Congress to look at his tax returns, to look at his businesses, to find out where this money is coming from. And they have that duty under the emoluments clause since it's their job.
Well, it's so important, and it's the kind of thing that some people may have forgotten about, and that the Republicans, in terms of being nonpartisan or independent, didn't seem to care about it. Christina, I turn to you. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a stupid question.
There are no stupid questions. Sorry.
Well, you are a professor and a teacher, and I thank you for that. Do you think that if Barack Obama kept open a privately held company that took money from assorted foreign governments, and I don't care where they are, the founders didn't care where they were, but I will note, including the fact pattern of Middle Eastern foreign governments. Do you think that would be just kind of a January story in the first year that we'd forgotten about?
So, Ari, we had to stop playing the what if Barack Obama game a long time ago, right? When Trump came down the escalator and said Mexicans were rapists and he was on his third wife.
Well,
right? So we had to like sort of that.
It was a drink. We did it as a drinking game, but then I passed out.
Right, exactly. So we had to stop that. I mean, the problem is, this is what George Washington warned us about in 1796, not just the hyperpartisanship that we're seeing, but he said we can never have a president who is possibly under the influence of a foreign government. And Nick is completely correct. The Democrats have to essentially walk and chew gum at the same time. They have to put forward a vision of the party, but they also, I do think, have to raise some serious questions as to where these taxes, whether or not the president has paid taxes, or where some of his business interests lie, because we know that the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C. has some really interesting relationships with the Saudi Arabian government, and we know that obviously there's some really problematic behaviors that are going on. So I think that those are worthwhile questions. We just can't make that the only agenda of the Democratic Party.
Right. The Trump and the Saudis at times are alleged to be friends with benefits, but the benefits are like tilting American foreign policy in a different direction.
Exactly.
Right, but they should be investigating the issues that the Democrats ran on. Why is it that how is it that the Trump administration is trying to dismantle Obamacare, trying to dismantle health insurance for the American people? How is it that the Trump administration is trying to dismantle environmental protections that impact everyone going forward? These are the kinds of issues that they ought to be focused on. Now, at the same time, they may get into some other areas, but they ought to be focused on what the voters are most concerned about.
Right, and they can investigate without bragging about it, right? They can talk to voters and tell them about what they care about, which is, as we've seen in the midterms, healthcare and the economy and their jobs and, their livelihood and their day-to-day, but also, to your point, do their job, investigate. Democrats are at the head of all of these committees. They can investigate federal lands being used, for fracking and for environmental destruction. The new changes that the lack of protections for children who are transgender in schools, rolling back those Obamacare regulations. There's so much for them to do, and they can do both at the same time. They can campaign and investigate.
And I think they can also raise some serious questions as to where these miraculous tax cuts going to come from, right? The Republicans in their unified government pushed through this Trump tax plan, and I don't think that anyone who's taken 9th grade math can see where any of us are going to benefit from it, except for top-level donors for Republicans. And so if the Democrats keep pushing not just the economy, but what is lost by giving all these tax breaks to other individuals.
Which brings us full circle. You said there's no stupid questions, and that would be a question for this outgoing Republican Congress, which is, if you hated the Obama deficit so much that was shrinking when you inherited it, why did you grow it? And I leave that stupid question out for everyone's consideration. I want to thank Nick Akerman, Christina Greer, and Liz Plank for walking us through the new Congress. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.